This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. Many thanks to Campaign Sidekick for supporting this podcast. Their tools for running an effective ground game will supercharge your campaign and help you win. Check them out at campaignsidekick.vote. I absolutely love getting to coach awesome conservatives. It's an incredible part of what I get to do, and Emily Cook is high on my list of favorites. She's a born and bred Texan, has worked in conservative politics for her entire career, and is a great attorney. More importantly, Emily and her husband, Justice, are new parents like myself and my bride. Their son, Andrew, is just a couple months older than my son, Stoney, and they work hard to make his life better and our state stronger every day. Late last year, it was to a large degree their dedication to Andrew's future that led Emily and Justice to make the decision that Emily would run for State House. Over the next 4 months, Emily ran hard and did a phenomenal job as a first-time candidate. While the election results didn't come back the way we'd hoped, she did a great job and learned a lot. Emily joins us this week to talk about her journey and some very specific lessons that she learned due to the fact that she was a woman, a conservative, and especially as a young mom. While it's an episode that everyone will learn from, her unique experience as a young mother will be especially valuable to anyone who may face a similar situation. Now let's get to the interview with Emily. Emily, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for asking me. Looking forward to it.
Well, we've known each other for God knows how long now. You and I have been working in the trenches in Texas politics for quite a while. A lot of your background being through Right to Life and working on pro-life issues. And over the last several months, for most of the last 6 months, you and I got to do a lot more work together through coaching as you were running for state rep. I want to, before we talk about what happened and the lessons learned there, I want us to back up and kind of hear a little bit more about your background, how you got involved in politics, what you've done for Right to Life, and a little bit about the transition from being, on the advocacy side to being the candidate.
Right. Our history together, we've tried to work together to help get other people elected, and then all of a sudden it was you coaching me on how not to be upset or to talking me down from attacks on our family and reminding me that God's in control, and that many times I sat in my car and called you to before I walked back in the house after a brutal day on the trail. So I cannot thank you enough for your friendship and mentorship in that capacity. But I started working in the pro-life movement during college. Actually, became involved with Texas Right to Life, which is not only Texas's largest pro-life organization, but we are the largest pro-life organization in the southern United States. And we have several arms, from educational outreach to college and high school students to a very aggressive legislative and political arms of our organization. I've served in almost every capacity from internship on up, and I now currently serve as our general counsel and manage the legal affairs of our 4 different entities, and we have over 20 full-time employees. And so it's I feel very blessed to be in that capacity before I'm even 30 years old, and we're really making a difference. But I block walked for candidates and helped other movement conservatives get elected and to run for office. And then all of a sudden I found ourselves in a situation. We know, most of our listeners know, that there's a civil war in the Republican Party between the moderate establishment, those who've been there since the 80s and 90s and who are in control, versus the movement conservatives. I'm staunchly in the movement conservative camp, and that civil war plays out from county chair races across the state upwards to the Texas Senate. And that civil war ended in my backyard. We had an open seat election back in 2016, and 6 people ran. The ultimate victor was not one of us. And I really felt compelled that growing up in this district, it's a 3-county district. It's about almost 3 hours from one end of the district to the other, very rural. But I grew up here, came back to raise my family after law school, and I just felt very called that our voters deserved another choice. And after consultation with everyone in the political movement that I consider mentors and my family and close friends, we decided in October of 2017 that I was going to run for state representative. And kind of the purpose, I guess, of me calling in today is when I made that decision, when we decided that this was the right step for our family and something that we were called to do, I had a 2-month-old baby.
Yeah, so that's a pretty big deal. I mean, normally when somebody's talking about running for office, one, they're probably later on in life, but the unique circumstances about the need for somebody to run, and the fact that nobody else is stepping up. You guys, as you and your husband prayed about it, you're like, something needs to happen here. And what played into that? I mean, this is not a decision you took on lightly. I mean, you had a great job working with Texas Right to Life. You had a 2-month-old baby, and all of a sudden you're saying, what is the biggest emotional roller coaster that I can tie on to the already big roller coaster of having a 2-month-old baby?
Exactly. And, I've lobbied for Texas Right to Life, so I've spent the last 4 legislative sessions every day in the Capitol. And during the 2017 session, when I was seeing those votes that our current state representative was taking, that was against the Freedom Caucus, against what folks expected and thought was happening in the Texas legislature back home. I was pregnant, obviously, at the time, and waddling around in the Capitol with my heels and, teetering over. But me and some other friends, and we were from the district, were trying to find someone else to run it. And folks have been encouraging Representative, lots of folks have been encouraging me to run, but I've said, I'm pregnant. I've never had a baby before. I don't know what this mom business is like. So there is no way I don't know if I'll even be able to handle it. I don't know. There's just too many unknowns. And,
well, learning to be a mom and learning to be a candidate simultaneously, either one of those things by themselves is a monumental task. You put both those together, and that's pretty wild. But the reason behind why you did that, you were under no illusions that either of those things was going to be easy, and you knew that putting them both together was going to be really hard, but there was a really compelling reason for you to do that.
Right. And funny note, on Christmas, my best friend last Christmas gave me a T-shirt that said Chaos Coordinator. Like, indeed.
Nope.
We had, I've never been one to complain about a problem and not do anything to fix it. I don't like to be what do you call them, a couch complainer or something like that. So when we were trying to recruit other candidates to run in the seat, based on voting record, one of which was a vote against banning late-term abortions on babies with disabilities, that just is abhorrent to me. Anyway, so we kept hearing all these, different not excuses, but folks, this isn't the right time in my life. I'd support someone else running, but it's not for me. And we were talking to, older, middle-aged men whose kids were grown, and I kept saying, okay, people, are you going to make the woman with the newborn baby run? And they're like, yeah, pretty much. Like, okay.
Y'all jerks.
And so I woke up, a lot of prayer. My parents were very integral to the point. They had to come around, and I don't like to do things that, even as 29 years old, that my parents disapprove of, and that was a very big ingredient for me. But what solidified the decision was I had been praying for a long time about whether this was the right move for our family, because as the things as you say, Coach, about the hierarchy of duties, and that, obviously. So I just woke up one day and was at peace with, if I lose, it's okay. And so that's how I knew that whatever the outcome was, we were called. And as soon as I was okay, had that sense of peace about that particular point, my mom called and was like, hey, I think this is an okay idea. I was like, oh, wow, because they had been so against it. Like, okay, well, all right.
Well, and that was a huge thing, because the way you approach that, as far as saying, hey, I need to have my husband on board and you have my parents on board. You had these people around you that you were getting advice from and saying, God, praying that God would speak through them to you. And that was both a kind of a fleece that you laid out to say, hey, is this the right call? Don't let my ego or any of my feelings, be the deciding factor here. But you also knew that from a outside the religious or emotional side, that from a very real logistical side, you needed their support. That you, being a brand new mom and a first-time candidate, that you needed grandma jumping in to take care of the baby so you can go out and block walk. You needed your husband helping out and doing those things even as he's in school. You needed, this was something that was not easy for anybody, but that as a team, that you guys could, that it was possible. You guys could actually make a run of this. And so with them coming on board, all of a sudden, you got people to watch the baby, people to help stuff envelopes. You were able to pull together interns. Luke Macias and his team came on board, working on the campaign consulting side. Luke's been on the podcast before. So all this stuff kind of started coming together pretty quickly. You knew that this was up against an incumbent that was going to have a lot of backing, that didn't really have a problem saying really whatever he felt like he needed to say to get his way. And you had identified both the reasons for you to be elected, why you would make a good state rep, as well as why your opponent should not be returned to the state house. So both of those were well researched. Yeah, exactly. So you went through those 3 whys. We talked about those, and you had those clear. And you looked at the campaign strategy and said this is going to come down to a lot of door knocking and a lot of person-to-person contact. So talk through a little bit of how this campaign kind of got started and what some of the early lessons were for you. Because like we mentioned earlier, you'd been involved in campaigns and lobbying in the legislature and all these things for a long time, have immense experience there, but once you put your name on the ballot, things kind of change, don't they?
Absolutely. And probably people who have been involved in the political process before at a very basic level on working on campaigns, we may be the worst candidates.
There's at least unique challenges.
Yeah, it does. But one of the first tips, if someone's listening to this who is the mom of young kids, and there's certain things that you really need to look at, and it's your tribe. Who do you have around you to actually help effectuate what the campaign and what your family is going, plus work. I mean, I was still working too.
Yeah.
So,
still got a full-time job, got a brand new baby, got a husband that's in school, and you're a candidate, and you were crushing it.
Thanks. Well, my in-laws and my parents live within 20 minutes of us. If that hadn't been the reality, I don't know. We I couldn't financially, I couldn't afford to have a live-in babysitter or something, right? So in order to, who around you do you have that's going to be on board to help you? My in-laws took a lot of the burden off of my husband as much as they could. My mother-in-law would come and cook dinner. My husband does most of the cooking anyways, because I'd rather poke my eyes out with hot coals than cook. But
it's pretty much the same in my house.
Yeah. But she would do our laundry. She would take care of Andrew after when I would be at events, or we'd have to go to joint events together in the evenings. And so when she would get off work, she would spend many weeknights at our house, and that was extremely invaluable. My parents, my son is very happy. My parents and already had a great babysitter a couple days a week who was a longtime family friend and who also lived next door to my parents. And so they were able to facilitate some of that just logistical issues going on. And then I got a great team. We had a great local team. I ended up a young girl just out of college had moved back to our hometown of Cleveland, and she posted on Facebook that she wanted she was looking for an internship in politics or law. And so people in Cleveland, okay, Cleveland's about 8,000 people, right, in the middle of nowhere. And Cleveland, Texas, for any listeners, this is not Ohio. But people started tagging me, right? Yep. And I told Luke, after 3 days of her working for me, I said, if nothing else good comes out of this, if nothing else happens in this campaign is worth bringing Sarah to us as a movement, because she is amazing. So now she's off on another runoff election. She's going to be working for Senator Connie Burton come the fall, and we're just really excited about how all that came together.
That's great.
But who is around you? I had wonderful ladies from church who already loved my son, who was like, you got to go block walk, bring him over, right? And these people, so it's who's your tribe. And then you have to figure out for yourself what are the benchmarks for you as a mom, as a woman, to believe that you are doing the best by your campaign and doing the best by your family. And most of us who are running for office are very type A people. We need goals to meet, to check that off the list. And for me, one of those goals about how to balance and how to know that I wasn't shortchanging my son. It was a personal goal of mine that I would nurse him until he was at least 6 months old. And for me, that was a very tangible way that if I couldn't nurse him until he was 6 months at least, then the campaign and politics was overriding his interests. So that ended up being what our daily schedules and about 10 people's lives revolved around. Like I mentioned earlier, our district was about 3 hours almost tail end to tail end. So that was valuable time. I couldn't drive myself to an event in Huntsville, right? Because I pumping in the car. Okay, so someone else had to come with me.
There's a lot of logistics that revolve around breastfeeding a child in the middle of the campaign.
And so whatever that, if you have kids who are, young school age kids, and maybe your tangible goal is you have to be at all of their T-ball games each week. That's how you can be at peace with doing the best by your kids and the campaign. Maybe that's your goal. But for us, that was that was my point. So we had, two things that candidates should always be doing. They should either be raising money, talking to voters, and then in my case, because those are the two things that the candidates can do the best, are nursing Andrew. Like those were the three hallmarks that our team tried to live by. If it wasn't one of those, they're in our family, right? Yeah. And so my parents bought into it, my in-laws, my church family, and obviously my husband. So I
think that's really awesome, and it's something I want to just highlight for listeners is, we've talked with Matt Krause and had Matt Rinaldi on a week or so ago. And so we've talked a lot from the male side of the importance of putting your family first above your political career, and really setting those goals for yourself to make sure that you're not letting your family be cannibalized in pursuit of politics. And just setting that what seems like a very simple goal, in actuality was very, very difficult to meet that goal. But just the act of setting that goal and saying, if I can't do this, then this is requiring too much. That right. It doesn't sound like much unless you're a mom who's gone through it or recently been a dad that's seen a lady go through that. But that is admirable and really, really cool to do that for your child and for putting your family first in that way. And I think that we've got to lay those things out. I talked about Matt Krause before, and one of the things he would always do anytime we'd meet up. About the only time we meet up anymore is ever since he got involved in politics is for breakfast. And we always do it really early. And we always do it at a place that has pancakes. And when he first sits down, he orders a big stack of pancakes for them to deliver with the check. And he takes them home, and we always end early enough that he can be home and have hot pancakes for his kids when they're getting up and ready for school. And so much of the time, it's those small things, those small promises we make ourselves and those around us that keep us centered. Because in the chaos of the campaign we're talking about in a moment, a lot of things go by the wayside. A lot of things that we thought were going to be important or that we said we would do to ourselves, they kind of go out the window. And it can be the number of times you shower in a week. It could be the number of events you go to. When we're trying to remember when the last time you had a glass of water instead of caffeinated beverage. There are a lot of those things that can go out the window, but we got to have those touchstones to remind ourselves whether or not we're keeping the right things first.
Right.
So let's kind of go into, now that we're in the campaign, we're in November, going into December, and you're launching this campaign. You were raising money. You were doing well on that front. You had a team together. You're out knocking doors, and something starts to happen. Your opponent starts to recognize that you as a legitimate threat. And as it happens, his attitude changes a little bit towards you. What happens there?
Well, I was called a prostitute during a forum.
Let's kind of pause that. Okay, so listeners, we have a young mother who's been working in pro-life politics for the better part of a decade, who is being called a prostitute by the middle-aged male incumbent who's supposedly a Republican at a public forum.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah, and my mom, my parents were in the audience, and they at that point, and oh my gosh, my father was beyond furious, which was really awesome because girl always likes to feel her dad's protectiveness.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it was an assault on my work with Texas Right to Life on pro-life policies, and I don't really know, somehow running because you believe in sanctity of innocent human life and you've worked towards that somehow is a horrible thing from their perspective, I guess. But yeah, so that was very interesting, and a lot of the times there were a lot of comments made about, he would talk about the sacrifices that he made. Like he in one forum, he said, when I was serving in this last session, I only made one of my son's baseball games, but luckily they're older, implying that this whole baby thing is untenable. It's an untenable situation, and that started to pick up about around February. For listeners, Texas primaries are the earliest, I think, in the country. First week of March is election day, and the early voting begins middle of February. So it was about the first couple weeks of February and into early voting that the whole mom situation came into play. Our team knew that. I mean, I knew going in that there were going to be perceptions that we were going to have to overcome just by the virtue of having young children. And so we did research. There's a foundation out there that does a lot of focus groups on how to respond and anticipate and try to guard as much as possible against those those perceptions. And
just go ahead and call it bigotry, because that's what it was. That's what they were. They were.
I mean, I think people.
It was absolute bigotry.
I think people are. I guess in their hearts.
I don't mean that as from the average voter, because I totally understand if you're an average voter and you haven't met. You don't know who Emily is, and you see this lady's got a little baby. It totally makes sense that you might be like, is this a good idea?
Right.
And can they juggle? Most people couldn't. So I totally understand why a voter might have a concern about that. But the bigotry was coming from your opponent's side, and the straight up calling you a prostitute. and
Right.
and really just putting you down and challenging your credentials as a mother because you were doing this. That gave you an opportunity, though, that you guys took advantage of to explain your why, because it really made it very clear. People were like wondering, why the heck would you want to do this? You got a 2-month-old kid. You got a good job. You got all these things. Why would you want to inflict this upon yourself? And so it gave you an opportunity for them to ask you that why question every single day over and over again, and for you to be able to articulate that clearly to the voters in front of you.
Right, because I've seen the gross, nasty underbelly of Texas politics and how all is not what it seems to be. And that's very, very motivated that when we have a problem in our own area, that we need to act to go in the correct direction. So, I would tell folks, it's because of my my son. I want things. Conservative policies aren't getting through the Texas legislature, and one of the after the election was over, I started hearing reports that one of my opponent's family members were telling folks, well, the real winner of this election is baby Andrew. And I thought,
wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. We had a conversation about it because, no, the election's over, right? I don't need other people opining on what our home life is like.
Yeah.
And that's really, I was very surprised at, you saw the polls. We did not do well with Republican women.
Mm-hmm.
Men, it didn't even, besides my opponent, just the men I met on the campaign trail, it just wasn't there. I mean, it didn't seem to me, this idea that I know there's an idea in especially liberal politics that Republican men just, want women to be in the kitchen cooking and having babies all the time.
Yeah.
I didn't experience that. The vitriol came from other women.
Yeah.
And you kind of see that in the mommy wars a lot. There's a Fayette County judge candidate currently in a runoff election. She's 9 months pregnant. I think she either already has 2 or 3 children. And she was in a forum last week and said, I want to address the elephant in the room, right? Because she understands, too, that there's this, and she explained how actually being county judge would be a more stabilizing factor in their family because she's head of an EMS trauma unit right now, and so she's constantly on call. But those are the explanations that we, as women, as moms of young kids, have to. I was constantly explaining how representing our area I would actually be at home more than in my current job. And those are things that I don't think no one else, when a man is running, you don't even blink twice.
No, it didn't come up. I mean, straight up, in all the campaigns that I've worked on with men, whether they were young dads or they were single or they were had children that were out of the house, nothing about the effect on their home life has ever come up outside of maybe a friend asking them, but not as their candidate capacity, and definitely not at the door. But you were being faced with it every day, and having conservative women who were attacking you for that in a very, very public way. And that's just, it's horrible. But it's a unique challenge that conservative women, I guess women candidates overall, but especially conservative women, I think because of the background, how conservatives tend to put family first. That's a really unique struggle to overcome that most no male candidates can ever have to face.
Right, and there's also just a voter education problem on the difference between U.S. Congress and the Texas House. Yeah. I would never run for Congress. I mean, not for many reasons, but definitely not with young children because. I mean, then you are away. I mean, you are halfway across the country and all the time. That's not something I'm called to do. Our family is not called to do something like that. But in Texas, the legislature is part-time. We meet every other year. odd-numbered years, and you and I both know that not a lot happens in January, February. It's not until around spring break that they actually start getting their act together. So, but I would have to explain that. One day I received a handwritten note. A handwritten note to my home from a voter that said something. It was shame that she would put her political ambition ahead of her child. Does the young father not make enough to support his family?
Wow.
Yeah. So for my husband, for one, I was just mad. But then there's also this. There's this perception that you run for office because of political ambitions, and sure, some do. That is not why we were running. Right? That's all a problem. And I more so than other candidates or potential candidates, I understood how that civil war plays out in policy, and that if I could just move one piece of the chessboard over to our side, that's part of a larger picture. So that kind of idea that you're just running for office for political ambition, and then I was also struck. Another tip for potential candidates, if your immediate family lives within the district that you're running for, do all you can to take them off of Facebook. Try not to have them on social media.
Did you guys have that conversation early in your candidacy before you jumped in, or was that something you guys got surprised by?
Nope. That, just from being around, that was taking advice from other people. That was something I tried to institute for myself. I stayed off of my personal Facebook, and the reason why is I knew just based on other people's experiences that there were going to be people whom I had known and had relationships with my whole life who would not support me. Mm-hmm. And the point I live in this community, grown up here. I'm going to come back. I mean, I was going to stay here. So I wanted to be able to go to the grocery store, see people, smile, ask them how their day was, and really mean it. So I didn't want to see what was being said. I tried. My mom and my godmother both have lived in this community for their entire adult lives. I tried to institute that same rule on them, but they wouldn't do it, and so it got really hairy. They lost friendships. You can't make grown people do something they don't want to do. But for candidates and candidates' families, if you can stay off of social media during the campaign, that is hands down. You just will be mentally, emotionally much better. But one of the things that really there were comments on Facebook that really got my mom, and how dare she? I value my motherhood too much to do what she's doing to her child. And typical mama bears, my mama said, I can comment on your motherhood skills all I want, but nobody else better. And she, but it was those kind of conversations. One of my staffers, block walker, Sarah, the young lady I was talking about earlier, her area to block walk was where I went to elementary and middle school, and it was in that area. So she was encountering people who had known me from a young age, and I may not, not teachers and stuff. I may not have actually, talked to them in 10 years or something, but she kept getting that at the door towards the end of the campaign about, I'm concerned about how she's going to manage, the baby, and it did strike me because there seems to be a disconnect. Women work all the time. Women are lawyers. Hello. Women are teachers. Women are nurses. Moms are nurses, social workers, professors, classroom teachers, EMS, police officers. But there is just something different that we as conservatives have not come around to, of women being in state government. I think that plays out. There was, currently there's only 8 women in the Republican House of in the House of Representatives that are Republican.
The Democrats probably none. And what do you think the youngest age of one is?
Oh, they're all grandmothers, right?
Yeah,
I can't think.
I don't think of a single one under the age of like 45 or 55.
Yeah, I can't think. I mean, Lois Colcourse is the youngest, and she's in the Senate.
Yeah,
and her kids are the youngest. I think her youngest kid just graduated, and I looked at her story actually because, she was, I think she was elected in a special election, and I'm pretty sure she was pregnant with her first child when she ran the first time, and she's had a great career, made a lot of difference, but I think that you see. And it kind of angered me, and I will be true. It angered me because Democrat women have the voice on what quote unquote women want on these policy issues such as abortion and abortifacients and what the family unit but yeah, we had a record number on the conservative side of women running for office this primary cycle. Mm-hmm. And you didn't hear the moderate leadership. It was not championed. And I firmly believe it was because we fell on the conservative side.
Yeah.
And, we did record-breaking number of women running for office in the Republican primaries. And you just didn't hear much about it. But hearing... I kind of insulated myself from during the campaign from attacks and didn't kept my head down, focusing on our three main priorities of donors, Andrew, and knocking doors. And so it was about a couple weeks after the election was over, I was getting back into a normal routine that started to analyze what how we think of female candidates, young mom candidates in Republican circles, and I think it will take voter education about what really happens in the legislature, how the legislature works, and just being active, showing folks that being in state government is the same thing as we all have to juggle, right? Moms always have to. If you have to juggle. It doesn't matter if you work inside or outside the home. We're planners. We multitaskers. That's how we're wired. And whatever your profession is, whether it's in the home or outside the home, a combination of both. We're pretty kick butt people.
Oh yeah.
And and just recognizing that whatever someone's situation is may look different than yours, but they're dealing with the same juggling factors and trying to figure out how this works for what they have to do for their family.
So, as we kind of get towards the end here, what you and I did a fair amount of coaching together over a lot of the campaign. What were some of the areas where you felt that was most helpful to you?
Coaching?
Yeah.
Being able to step back, have a perspective that pulls you back from the center to look at it, look at what's going on from a bird's eye view, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons I chose Luke Macias as my consultant. I've worked with Luke for years, and even in the process of deciding whether to run, and in all his other clients, he has always been, win or lose, the sun comes up the next day. This is not the most important thing in your life.
Yeah.
If you're elected, it's not going to be. It's still. I trusted Luke to keep me centered on what's important. That's why I chose Luke. And it worked out. And he, when you we would talk, and that perspective, like I said, many times after coming home, I would just you guys would kind of recenter me before I went back to kind of bore the brunt before, so that my poor husband wouldn't have to.
Well, I think that part of the value of having a good consultant and the coaching that I try to provide for folks is that in your case, most candidates focus on voters and donors. You had Andrew in there. When you're in that day-to-day, it's very hard to detach and create distance. And at the end of the day, you have to be able to put it down and go back in your house and be a mom, be a wife. And, if you're a guy, you got to go, be able to focus on your kids and be present in their lives. You got to be with your wife and family, and you got other stuff that's outside of politics. And, it takes work to do that. And when you're constantly in the pressure cooker of a campaign, it's not natural to be able to just set that aside, because these are real people saying really nasty things about you. And these are real campaign problems and strategic decisions that you're making that have big implications for whether you win or you lose. These are not small things. And detaching from that, even just briefly, and it takes somebody sometimes grabbing you by the back of the neck and pulling you back and saying, hey, we got to detach for a second. What's real? What's true? What's actually happening here? And what is the most important thing you'll ever do? And say, okay, look at Andrew. That's the most important thing you'll ever do.
Right.
What's more important? What's that hierarchy of duties? That's critical. And whether it's your consultant or a coach or a good friend, you got to have somebody that can do that on a regular basis, because otherwise you're going to go sideways and you're going to lose focus on what the thing is.
Right. And you're going to make life miserable for everyone around you.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And you're probably going to make it harder to win or more likely to lose in the process, because it's going to impact that being out of focus is going to not just impact how you treat your family, it's going to impact how you see the campaign and going to skew things within that world as well, because you're not keeping your mind healthy and you're not keeping priorities straight.
I had a great during in the middle of the campaign. We started, and I also took steps to do things during the campaign that were I continue doing the things in our community that I was doing before the campaign, because to keep centered. And so we started a young women's Bible study, trying to grow our young adult outreach at our church. And one thing that someone brought to our attention was an app, a daily devotional app. And we were all crazy. One's a stay at home mom, one's a teacher, me, we have a professor, and so all sorts of different crazy juggling. We have 1 kid to 3 kids, all kinds of stuff. But we tried as a community to keep each other accountable by requiring that we do this first 5 devotional. It's a devotional every morning for 5 minutes, and you don't always get to it, but especially during the campaign, sometimes my staff, they would wait on me to, whether it's we would stay in the car and so I could finish the devotional if I hadn't gotten to it that morning because of Andrews was fussy and business. That's what we did. Or we would be quiet, not talk on the way to Huntsville, so that I could do the devotional. And
I like it.
Yeah, and the days that I didn't, you could totally tell. Right, yeah. Just the way the day went. Oh man, yeah. So there's things that happen. Proactive steps that you can take to keep yourself centered on the campaign, and especially and to just know that if you're a mom of young kids, you're going to encounter some very interesting, it's a bias and preconceived notions, and they're not, some of them are kind of ugly, like they're meant with hatred, but I don't, like my teachers, they genuinely cared, right? Yeah. I don't think it's a,
that was concern out of love, and
right.
And from some people it is, and it can be hard to tell the difference, but especially because the same thing can be said out of hate or out of love in some of those cases. And you got to respond differently depending on which one it is.
Right.
And that can be difficult, especially when you're talking about more than just you is making these responses. Some of them are from people that are out there working on your behalf. Some are via family on social media. There's a lot there that you got to figure out. And you got to be able to deal with each of those individually.
And you can plan for some of that. That's one of the points of why coming on the show is that you can predict. We predicted that some of that would happen, and so when it started to kind of seem like that was getting to be the narrative, then it was time to release a statement about what you're feeling. You have to be okay. At first, I was hesitant about whether to even put Andrew in our pictures, and because I didn't want it to seem like I was trying to use my baby for political gain. And Luke said, "Emily, Andrew is going to be a part of this campaign, and that's it." And sometimes, especially when you're in a campaign, you need people to just make decisions for you.
Right.
And so that's why it's so important to choose someone whose value and judgment and discernment you trust.
Yeah, you gotta be able to trust them back. You're in a foxhole together.
Right. And that's one thing with Luke. I always knew that Luke had me and my family foremost. Taking care of us was his first goal. Winning secondary.
Yeah.
That's incredibly important. But just to know, and you have to be willing. You cannot say, well, we're not going to talk about my kids. If you are a mom with young children running for office, you are going to have to be okay with people scrutinizing and you explaining to complete strangers the very intimate details of your life.
Yeah.
That is what you sign up for.
Well, and part of that, the reason why, Luke and all of us were talking about the importance of including Andrew and just making very clear that you had a young child was that we knew that that the people that were going to attack you for that, they were going to use Andrew as a negative. They were going to try to use your own child to attack you and your character and morality. That we needed to highlight that within the campaign to show what kind of mom you were and to help undercut those attacks. So Emily, now I'm gonna have to have you back on, because I want to have another conversation where we look at the lobbying side and being an issue advocate within the legislature. I think that'll be very helpful, that as somebody that's done so much of that, to be able to share with potential candidates and staffers what they need to look for, both the good and the bad in lobbyists, and realizing that there are good and bad. You're an example of the good ones. But where can folks find you online? You're on social media. I'm sure that we'll have some folks that may have some questions for you, and they can always reach out to me to connect y'all. But where can folks find you online and find out more about Texas Right to Life as well?
Absolutely. Well, you can email me any questions at emily@emilycook.org, emily@emilycook.org. Pretty easy. TexasRightToLife.com handles information on all of our entities. That's TexasRightToLife.com, all spelled out. Additionally, I have a Facebook page. I have a personal Facebook page, Emily Kibido Cook, and my public Facebook page, Emily Kibido Cook. If you and I have enough mutual friends in the movement together, then I think you're probably an okay person, and I'll accept your friend request.
Very good, very good. And you're on Twitter as well, right?
Oh yes, that is Emily Cook _Texas, TX, Emily Cook _TX. During session, I'm pretty much an avid tweeter. Is that the right word?
I've heard it said multiple ways.
I don't know, but during the Texas legislative sessions, that's where Texas politics lives, and so outside of session, I don't use Twitter very much, but during session, you can get all sorts of updates.
Fair enough. Well, Emily, thank you so much for taking part of your morning to spend with us, and I'll be including the links to those things in the show notes and listen to all out there. And I just thank you for sharing it. It's a pretty unique perspective and a very, I just really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's important to share with our listeners. So thank you, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Raz. Bye.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.